Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to our legislative training. I am Matthew Seawood, co-founder of the Just Action Coalition. There's some more about my bio on the screen. I'm here with my good friend, Jalen Travis.
What's going on? I am also the co-founder of the Just Action Coalition, class of 2024 at Princeton University. And you have both Matthew and I's contact information on the bottom. For after this training, you can reach out and contact us. And next, I'd like to formally introduce Jasmine from the Center for African American Heritage through the state of Minnesota, who's going to be helping assist us in this training as we go forward.
Talk about
Hi, thank
talent.
you so much, Matthew. Oh yeah, thank you.
Yes.
So I'm here today. I'm the Legislative and Policy Director for the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage at the state. I have my contact information on the screen, and also our website address that you can see at the screen just to get more information about us. Our main job is to advise the governor as well as the state legislature, so all 201 members that are at the state capitol on issues that impact people of African heritage. So tonight I'll be sharing with you a little bit about the legislative process, as well as those issues that are being talked about and how you can get involved. So I'm really excited, and stay tuned for what I'm about to share. Thank you. So a little bit about the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage. It is a state agency that advises the legislature as well as the Walsh administration, so the governor, as well as the state enterprise. So that is all the state agencies at our state. So the Department of Human Services, Department of Education, we are all in communication with them. We advise them on policy issues, and then we go to the legislature and advocate for those issues during the legislative session. So just a little housekeeping things. With our agency, we are a nonpartisan agency, so we don't, we are for the issues, and we're not picking either of the sides around party affiliation. So just keep in mind that the information that I'm presenting today will be nonpartisan and non-party affiliated. So as we get started, I'm going to go over just a state update on the state's response to the murder of George Floyd, give an overview of the state legislature, and that includes leadership in public safety as well as the Posse Caucus members. And then I will go through about 4 different ways to get involved in the legislative process, and you'll learn how to contact your legislator as well as give public testimony and do a legislative visit. Okay, so just before we dive into the legislative training piece, just to give an update of the state's role in the response to the murder of George Floyd that happened this past May. One of the first things that the governor did and that the council advised the governor as well as the state enterprise on was prosecuting the 4 Minneapolis police officers involved in the murder of George Floyd. And we also asked if the governor could help maintain that we get the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, on there to serve as a co-prosecutor, just because of the history with Minneapolis and police shootings. And we know there hasn't been anyone outside of Mohammed Noor who was charged as a police officer for a crime. So having that was a key role in moving kind of the system forward on that. And then the second thing is the Minnesota Department's human rights investigation. So we have one of the strongest human rights laws in the entire country. So our Department of Human Rights was able to begin an investigation. So they put in a TPO, which is a temporary protection order, where they were able to go in and find some key policies that they saw off the bat, which includes prohibiting chokeholds and other policies for the Minneapolis Police Department that have a racial impact. And then they're going to be opening an investigation that they're doing right now, where they're looking into policies, procedures, and practices over the past 10 years. So anyone, if you've had any experiences that you felt were discriminatory with the Minneapolis Police, please reach out to the Human Rights Department and put in your complaint and your report of your interaction with them. And then the last thing that we sought to do as an agency during this time of the summer, during special session, is to prioritize police accountability legislation. So we'll get into that a little further. But during the June special session, we were able to come to terms with the House as well as the Senate, and they were able to negotiate on some police accountability legislation that has been in the works for a while. So these aren't new bills that were thought of afterwards. These are policies, 20 of them, that were actually introduced throughout session. So even though they weren't able to pass at the level that they were originally written to, there was able to have some strides in regards to getting some key police accountability, as well as getting some community engagement at the post board. And then the key legislators who were able to advocate for that was the Posse Caucus, which it consists of the people of color and indigenous caucus, which we'll get into a little bit later, House DFL leadership, the governor's office, as well as the Senate Republican parties. They all introduced legislation on both sides and priorities, but they were able to come and pass something in that June special session. So why we have this training, a reason why we're doing this training today is just to let everyone know that there are many decisions that are made at the Capitol about us without us. We're not in the room, we don't come, our issues aren't heard. We may hear an issue that's talked about, but they don't look at it intersectionally all the time. So looking at different races and how people are impacted. So knowing that it's very important to be in the room, because if we're not in the room and they're making decisions, we're not being accounted for and our issues aren't being addressed. The state capitol is your house. So if you bought something at the store, we got state taxes on the receipt. Those are your taxes that are going to pay for your legislators and the salaries and the things that go on in the state's budget. Legislators represent you, the constituent. So if you have someone and you live in the state of Minnesota, you have 2 representatives that are working on your behalf. So just knowing that and knowing that you pay for them as well as they represent you, it's the key to just let people know in this training that you do have ways to engage and you are able to hold them accountable. And then the last thing I want to touch on is that we're all experts on something. There is power in using your personal stories and lived experiences. Especially for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, our stories are not often told. They may hear sound bites, but when talking about all these issues that are going on, knowing that your story, that your lived experience is something that can help influence policy. So we'll talk about that a little later, but your stories and your lived experiences, you don't always need data. They do help change laws.
And understand that as the youth, you have a unique perspective, and unique power. A lot of the things that we say as the Just Action Coalition, we got next is now, right? So understanding that your time to speak out and speak up about these issues and take control of the future is now. And we are giving you some constructive ways to go about doing that.
Thank you. So we can do an experience check just quickly with you and Jalen if we want, and then we'll get into it. But just everyone can see, just think about what experience you've had. Have you been, do you know who your legislator is, your House or your state representative? Have you contacted them before? Have you been to the state capitol, or have you attended a legislative visit? Just throwing that out there, those are a few things and ways that people can engage, but there's more.
Use this as a checklist going forward. So when you're thinking about, well, something happened, how do we move forward from here? These are some things that you can think about to get you started in making sure that your voice is being heard, and that your story or your message is getting out there to the right people. So use this checklist as something mental for you when those situations arise.
So the state legislature composition. So at the state legislature, which is the state capitol that's in that picture right now, you have 67 senators and 134 House members. So what that breaks down to is that there are 2 for each Senate district. So that is 201 state legislators. So if you live in, let's say for instance, District 67, you have a 67A, a 67B, and then your senator is in Senate District 67. So you may have a senator in Senate District 67, and then your House representative is from 67A. So you'll have one of each, and they both work in different bodies. They both work on laws, but they have a different leadership in charge, and they work a little differently. But at our state capitol, it's very remnant of the federal level, where we have a split legislature. So in our House of Representatives, which is known as the People's House, it is controlled right now by the DFL party. And the Senate, which is the upper body, they're more formal, they are controlled by the Republican Party. So because we have a divided legislature and they have different priorities on both sides, it's really hard they're not aligned on all their same policies. So getting things passed is kind of difficult during that time. And that's what we saw this past biennium. But we were able to get some strides with police reform, but just know the politics of it does have an impact of how things happen and when they're able to get passed. Next slide. Legislative duties. So your legislator has many different duties. Their main time during session is January through May or February through May, but they have a few goals, and one of them is passing the state budget. So each year, session starts, and the first year of session, they have the state budget. And during that time, if they're not able to come to agreement of that state budget, that's when we have a state shutdown. So next year, which is going to be 2021, will be the beginning of a biennium. And legislators will have from January 5th, when session starts, to the 3rd week of May to come to a final budget. They also introduce and study bills. So they sit on several committees, but they get to choose what bills they want to introduce, whether it's for their constituents, an issue that someone came to them, or an issue that they work on in their job, or for a committee, and then they study bills. They serve on committees in the House or the Senate, wherever they serve. So that could be housing, public safety. They serve on task force that are at the state, all the state agencies, as well as outside. They have leadership positions as well. So they're playing different roles throughout session and throughout the year. And one of their main jobs is representing each of you as constituents of their district. And just so you know, when you are a constituent, you do get priority on their schedule. So going to House leadership, currently right now we have the Speaker of the House, who is Melissa Hortman. She represents Senate District 36B, and that is going to be in the areas of Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center. And then we have Majority Leader is Representative Ryan Winkler, and he came back to the House. So he was a representative before, but when our Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan ran for Lieutenant Governor, that's when he came back and ran for that seat. So he is in Senate District 46A. And then we have our Minority Leader, which is Representative Kurt Doubt. And Kurt Doubt was actually the Speaker of the House prior to our last election in 2018. So Minority Leader Doubt, who is from the Republican Party, the Republicans were in power in the House. So in the last term of the House, he was actually the Speaker of the House and in charge of making the decisions. Okay. And then we have the House POC Caucus Police Accountability Leaders, some of them that are listed. We have Representative Rena Moran, who is Senate District 65A, and she is also the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, and also the chair of the Posse Caucus. We have a few other members here, Representative Manute Moore, as well as Representative Hoden Hassan, who have all authored language in the police accounting policies, and including the chair, who is not on the slide, but that's Chair Mariani, and he is also the head chair of the Public Safety and Criminal Justice Committee that we'll get to later, and he is also in the Posse Caucus. So they were all a part of a 20-member team passing police accountability since before the murder of George Floyd, and especially during those times while they were negotiating to get something passed this summer. Okay. And then in the Senate, we have Majority Leader Senator Paul Gazelka. We have Senate President Senator Jeremy Miller, as well as Minority Leader Senator Susan Kent. So in the Senate, it's the more formal House. So there are less committees. It's more, the rules are kind of more structured. And with Majority Leader Gazelka, he does not chair the meetings how the Speaker of the House does. He is in the same area where the other senators are, and the Senate President is the one who kind of chairs the meetings in the Senate. So Majority Leader is still in charge, but he's not in the front of the room calling the meeting to order. And then on the minority side, on the opposite of the House, so the Republicans are in charge. So Majority Leader Gazelka and Senate President Jeremy Miller are in the Republican Party. And then we have Minority Leader Susan Kent, who took this role after the start of this session earlier this year, and she replaced Senator Bach from Duluth. So Minority Leader Susan Kent is from Woodbury, and she is the current minority leader in the Senate. So she's negotiating with the Senate and talking to her counterparts in the House, and the same for Majority Leader Gazelka, who, you know, may check in with Minority Leader Kirk Doubt because they're in the same party. Okay. And on the Senate side, we have Senator Jeff Hayden, who represents the district where George Floyd was murdered at, and is one of the leaders in the Posse Caucus in the Senate. And he was an advocate for several of the policies that were in the Posse Caucus's policies that they put out earlier this summer. And then another advocate who was on before advocating for the policies that did not pass in the Senate, but they were able to pass in the House, was Senator Bobby Joe Champion, who represents North Minneapolis. And he is also a part of the Posse Caucus and an advocate on the police accountability reform that passed earlier this year. Okay, and then just to see the full scope, we wanted to highlight our Governor, Tim Walz, and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. So we'll talk about them a little bit more as we're talking about the legislative process. But when you're making decisions at the legislature, you have the legislature, but the governor is the one who ultimately signs off on a bill. So he can veto a bill, or he can sign off on it. So he, at the beginning of the year, along with the Democrats and the Republicans, they release their priorities. The governor does too, and he also releases a budget. So all of them play a role in the negotiating process. So that was evident with the police reform, but also in other legislation where they all three sides have to work together to come to an agreement most of the time. Okay, go to the next
This
slide.
is a special moment. We wanted to make sure that we talked about Chairwoman Rena Moran, Chief Author of Reforming Accountability Act. This is huge for us because we spoke with her before this bill was passed. Just talking about some of the things that are in it, being able to bring a youth perspective to the things that are in it, how it operates. And now what we're doing is shifting and forming things for us going forward around this Accountability Act. So it's been huge for us, and they did a really good job when we wanted to make sure that we highlighted her again in this presentation.
Oh, definitely. She was a part of the negotiations and played a strong role, which she talked about in our session debrief. And we've worked with her as she's one of the longest serving legislators on our council. So she, even before the Police Accountability Act came, she's always been an advocate as a leader of the Posse Caucus. So definitely want to create space to, you know, for all her hard work that she's done to pass that legislation, which is really difficult to do at the legislature.
Be thinking about this question. So if you could pick one issue to address around public safety and police reform, what would it be and why? Really think hard about this question. We need all hands on deck. It's not going to be enough to just have a handful of people coming up with ideas and pushing them through. This training is designed to not give you power because you have it, but to help you understand the power that you have and then enact that power to change policy. So think about some things that you can change. Think about some things you can, we'll teach you how to form emails, how to do legislative visits, those type of things. This is going to be your basis to have that communication.
So just want to give some background on the public safety committees. before we get into how to engage, just so you know what the landscape looks like. So in the House, we have 34 committees. In the Senate, right now, we have 21 committees. That could change. With the elections happening this November, you may have new leadership. So they ultimately decide kind of what those committees look like and subcommittees look like. A typical meeting schedule during session, which, like I said, is during either January, this coming up, it's going to be January 5th to that third Monday in May, so the Monday before Memorial Day. And those meetings happen Monday through Thursday, typically from 8:30 to 5 p.m. So you may have some committees that start at 8, some that start at 2 or 4 in the afternoon, and they usually have sessions 2 days a week where they meet to do business. So whether that's introducing legislation, voting on it, putting out new amendments, that all happens during the day. But it is available online and it's open to the public during regular non-COVID time. So in the House, go back. In the House, we have the Public Safety and Criminal Justice Reform, Finance, and Policy Division, and then there's also the Corrections Division, so it's a subcommittee, and those are typically the first committees that in the House, if a bill is related to public safety or police reform, it's going to get referred to that committee. And in the Senate, that's going to be the Judiciary and Public Safety, Finance, and Policy Committee. So in the House, you have Chair Considine for the Corrections Division, and you have Public Safety is going to be Chair Mariani. And then in the Senate, that is Chair Warren Limmer from Maple Grove, who is in charge of that Judiciary and Public Safety, Finance, and Policy Committee.
Can you touch on briefly what committees do as far as, you know, forming bills before they come to the floor of the House?
Yeah, I think on the next slide I might go a little deeper, but yeah. I can, or the one where it had the bill breakdown. But what committees do is, here we go. So I have a committee path just to kind of show how the bill works during the committee process. But committees will get a bill that's referred to them. So I have the example, the restoration of voting rights. So that's to give people who have been released for prison, even of a felony crime, they're restoring their votes upon release. So with that, the first committee got sent to was a subcommittee on elections. So when it gets to that first committee, there's a meeting agenda, and they'll usually have a hearing. So each bill, you'll have the author come and sit down, and they'll talk about what the bill is. They'll go through with research and break down the different areas of the bill, and then they'll usually have public testimony. First public testimony is usually with those who might be different stakeholders that the legislator is working with, or someone who has a focus area on something that's included with the bill. So it could be a professor to someone who works at a hospital, who is a doctor, who will give their perspective. But it's also where community can come in. And I've been in bills like Teachers of Color, where we've had students come, we've had teachers come. So there's different opportunities to participate in the committee process. But ultimately, after testimony, they go and they either vote on a bill to pass it out of committee into the next committee, or they could lay it on the table and have further discussion on it later. So bills can be alive technically for a full biennium, which is 2 years. So it can be introduced in 1 year, and technically it has that full time to go and through the committee process, which you can kind of see here, since for this bill you got 1, 2, 3 committees and 1 in the House, and then you have a few in the Senate. And then it also has to go to the floor for a House vote. And it has to pass through every committee. So if there's something on elections, it goes to elections, but there's a change in how state government works and a law that they have. So it has to get approved by government operations. And because it does have, it's changing in regards to how the judicial system works in regards to those who've been incarcerated, having those rights restored, it has to go through public safety. So it has to make it through every different area and get passed. and then it goes to the floor. So a committee process, some bills may make it through all of them during a session, but sometimes it's rare for a bill to pass, especially standalone through one session. So that's why it just takes a lot of people to come and to be at all those hearings, because each of them have a hearing. Okay, and then we were going to touch on some ways to get involved in the committee process. So emails and calls to your legislator. So when you look at your legislator, which I think we'll show we'll give some resources of how to find your legislator, you're able to see what committees they serve on. So some may serve on 3 or 4 committees. If you see your legislator is on a committee and you want to reach out to them about something, you can send them a call or you can email them. On top of that, you can reach out to legislators that are on the committee. They may not be your legislator, but if you're interested in addressing public safety, this is when you reach out to the chair, or you have a bill you want them to support, you can reach out to the committee members. So looking at that and sending that email, asking them to support it, asking them why this matters to you, and talking to the committee chair and the members and also your legislator. Even if your legislator isn't on that committee, reaching out to them and letting them know, hey, I reached out to this legislator about this issue. I'm a constituent in your area, and I want you to know that I really want your support on this, because they'll have to vote on it if it comes to the House or Senate floor. So there is an area for them to support, and they can also talk to the other legislators. Legislative visit. So a legislative visit is when you meet. That could be your legislator that represents you in your district. It could be the committee chair, or it can be a committee member. You can meet on a specific bill that you have that you want them to support. You can meet about an issue. You can discuss changes on a certain bill. You can see that, you know, hey, you didn't look at it like this, or I have this experience and it's not touched on in this bill. Is there a way to add that into this bill? So you can have a meeting about that, or just to get to know them. A lot of meetings are just introductory meetings and knowing about what their priorities are and what chair they sit on. And you can determine kind of what relationship and how you engage with them in the future. But it's a great thing to do. And even right now during COVID, once the election passed, there might be opportunities to do this virtually as well. But you can reach out to a legislative assistant and they can always see if they are able to get you on a legislator's schedule, as well as you have priority if you're their constituent on their calendar as well. And then attending the committee hearing. So as I mentioned earlier, those committee hearings happen Monday through Thursday virtually and in person pre-COVID. I know we'll be able to see what the new guidelines are probably later this year. But there are ways to get involved even up to the moment. When we're talking about testimony, verbal and written testimony, it's easy to sign up. You can just send an email to whoever the CA is. And usually the timeline is 24 hours or less, or 48 hours in the Senate mostly. But you can sign up to have your voice be heard. If you see a bill that you're interested in or against, and you want to be able to go in and share your experience or tell them, hey, this is what's going on. You know, I see you have this bill about police reform, but this is my interactions with the police, and I don't see this being talked about when we have this issue. So you can do that verbally, you can do it written, and before they make those decisions, they're listening to community members, they're listening to those who may be impacted by an issue, but you have the time to engage in that process, and it's open to anyone. Like I said, students have parents on certain issues. You don't have to be an expert to give testimony at the legislature.
And before we move on, I just want to reiterate several of the things she said, but most importantly, that this is your power right here. This is how you impact the long-term change that we talk about. Getting in contact with your legislator, getting in contact with the members who represent you is how you hold them accountable. Because ultimately you are their constituent, like she has hit on before, and you have to hold them to that. So if they're doing something that you may not like, it is your responsibility to speak up and say something. Or if they're doing something that, you know, you're opposed to, or, you know, you're in favor of, it's your responsibility to speak up and either support them or speak out against it. So this is very important. I know we're going to hit on that briefly coming up.
Okay. So for emails and calls, you want to make your ask clear and speak with confidence. You are showing your power. We all have a certain power. Our stories matter. So speaking with confidence and making that ask clear, telling them specifically what you want. Legislators, they talk to a lot of people, but something as I've been at the state for 5 years and working in my position, working closely with legislators for the last 2 years. And you want to be as specific as possible, but know that they hold on to those stories. As you're talking to them and as they're advocating, going about in committees talking about these bills on the floor, they're telling and using your stories because that's what sticks out to them the most. You know, you have statistics, but those stories that you're able to share with them. And channel your emotions. You can do it in a constructive manner. So you're able to verbalize and show why this is important to you, show, you know, your passion for this issue, and also that this is real life. These issues, they're not something you see on TV. What you're going through every day. And, you know, you may have legislators, they represent the whole state of Minnesota, and your experience looks different, you know, depending on your background, depending on where you come from, depending on everything. So channeling your emotion, but explaining your story and doing it in a constructive and concise way is something that you want to make sure you do in emails, especially, but as you're leaving the call, and you could be talking to the legislative assistant who is recording all these and they keep track of them, or you could be leaving on their voicemail or have an opportunity to actually, like I've called legislators and calling for a legislative assistant, and it's the legislator that answers. So always be prepared to share your story and to make your voice heard. Okay, so attending a committee hearing, be attentive and take notes. It's helpful that these meetings are online, so after they happen, you can always go back on YouTube or on the committee site and watch them if you miss them, so you don't have to watch them in person, and be able to follow along. But take notes and also see who's in those positions, because right after it's over, even if you don't speak at the committee, you can always reach out to a legislator right after and follow up on something that they talked about or prior to their next committee hearing. And then take notes, just so you know, you can keep track of who's saying what, who's the one who's making the decisions. And if you find someone that's supporting an issue or says something that you want to follow up for, just be able to reach out to them, and you can do that through their LA. But it's great just to take notes of that so you know what your next steps are.
I'll give you a personal example. I remember that I attended my first legislative hearing over the summer when we were starting the coalition, watching people from the NAACP speak and a few other organizations that were there. And that's why we said be attentive, right? So that's how you are able to, if you want to volunteer, if you want to maybe talk to some of these organizations that are doing really good work in our community, this is a great place to get involved and to get engaged. So be attentive, look and see who's there, see who you can contact and say, hey, I'd like to volunteer with you guys. I really like what you guys are doing. Those are some ways that we got started, and those are some ways that you guys will get a better understanding of who's doing really good work here in Minnesota. And definitely take notes. You know, all of us are students here or have been a student at some point. So understanding that that's how you can fully get a grasp of these events, and then be able to, you know, communicate and talk about it afterwards.
Yeah, I'll add one thing. If you have access to the internet and you're able to, use the state's website. They put a list of all the testifiers on there after there. You can look at and see kind of the letters of support. So if you're not able to catch it, there's always somewhere where you can find that information, because it's out there. So just use it and then ask if you can't find it. Okay, so for verbal or written testimony, some tips are to be clear and concise. Your point is important, and you want to make sure that you're able to utilize that time. You may get 2 to 3 minutes at most, and you may be one of 30 people. In my last one of the hearings, which is not even a committee, but it's one of our state councils, it's the Sentencing Guidelines Committee. We were able to advocate for probation for those who have a non-felony crime to get their probation capped at 5 years. So I was one of 30 people who was testifying. So you have so many people who are sharing their stories. You want to be able to concise and conceptualize what you want to say and speak from the heart. So not only keep it clear and short, but use your story, use your experience. We've all been impacted by something and we all have a unique experience. You may think, you know, this isn't helpful or this doesn't matter, but it does. I say this all the time. There are so many legislators who are on our committee who, it could be education, some may be a teacher, some maybe have no experience and haven't dealt with the education system in 30 years. So everyone has different interest levels, everyone has different backgrounds. So don't think that your voice doesn't matter because you're not an expert. You are. If you go through something, if you face something, your experience is valid and it needs to be shown and out there in the public. So just make sure to get your point across, but know that your point matters. And there's a lot of people who I talk to who, you know, who may testify and they're like, I didn't know it was so easy. Or, you know what, like, I'm really glad I participated because there was no one who, like, even though a lot of people go through this or may face it the way that I do, there was no one who gave that perspective. So just don't take it for granted. And if you're able to, do it, and then encourage someone, you know, who may be impacted. And, you know, like, this is an avenue to get those issues addressed. So just make sure to get that point out, though. Okay. And then legislative visits. So before your legislative visit, you want to figure out what your purpose is. You want to figure out what legislator you're going to see, and then you want to make sure that you do that prep work. So those are the three key things that you want to tackle. And once you do each of those, you'll be well on your way to have a great legislative visit and kind of build a tool for that, so that way you can use it as session goes on. So defining your purpose for the visit. These visits tend to be very short. Right now, like I said, they may be happening online, but even in person, the Capitol is not an easy place to get to and park at. So it's usually, you know, you're rushing there and you're trying to get at that meeting. So you want to be able to get it down in 15 to 20 minutes, especially during session. Legislators speak with a lot of people. But you can utilize this visit, you know, to research, to learn more about them, to talk about a specific bill if there's something that you're interested in, you want to know if they'll support it, if you want to know what's being done at the legislature about this specific issue, if you have a bill idea or just a concern in their district that happened and you want them to know, or it might be a concern with the committee they serve on. So say you've been watching the committee process, you might even testify, and you see that there is no bills for a certain issue. So you can go to them and reach out to set up a meeting, but just know what that purpose is before you go to schedule it and as you prepare. Next, you want to research your legislator. So this can be helpful just to build rapport, to see where their interest lies, to know what their background is. So as you're figuring out what type of conversation or what your ask is, and as you're defining your purpose, you can utilize that to leverage whatever you're talking about. And then just a lot of meetings with legislators and navigating the legislative process is about relationships. So just knowing what things you can learn about them and where you connect at, even if it's somewhere in their district they like that you like. Just finding what that one thing is super helpful as you build relationships. Prep materials. So a packet for legislators. So if you're coming for a student group and you have your group members, maybe having a one-pager that talks about what your group is and what your interests are. If it's a specific bill that you want them to support, coming with that bill language or something to talk about that bill. Or if you have a legislative agenda, say you're with an organization and there are a couple bills that they're interested in, just make sure you bring that. So then no matter how long your meeting comes, sometimes they go long, sometimes they're cut short, you have everything they need if you have to end it immediately. So then that way they can follow up to you. And then prep talking points. So just determine who your lead speaker is if you're in a large group, and find a storyteller, someone who's going to be able to share that experience and find different roles so everyone can participate, especially during that 15 or 20 minutes. It'll help you stay on track, but then it'll allow the opportunity for everyone who's in the group to play a part.
I just want to hit on one thing that you repeated a few times is relationships. And I know Matthew will reiterate this point 1,000 times over. But you know how the saying goes, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And this is ever important with legislators. So if you're showing up 5 to 10 minutes late for a meeting, you know, you think about how that impacts them and whether they're going to value your point of view as if you were there on time. Right. And, you know, personally, I view there's no excuse during this, you know, online time of, you know, virtual visits with our legislators. You know, show up 5 minutes early to your Zoom meeting with them and just see how that impacts them. And I guarantee you they'll be, you know, ever more, you know, delighted to see that you care that much to share your point of view and where you're coming from by just that little simple gesture of being on time.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, next slide. I'm having an issue with the slide, but I have slide 31 up. So the legislative visit, you want to make sure that you're able to give that intro and connect. You also want to have a conversation, so figuring out what that issue, what that story, and what that pitch is. And then have enough time to wrap up and be able to reiterate what your ask is, and then some follow-up steps. So just be sure to have a way to follow up with them, leaving your email, a phone number, whether it's an event that's coming up that you want them to attend, having some clear follow-up actions defined before you, as you're planning that legislative visit. Okay, 1 second.
You basically already went over this, so we can go to 32 or 33, sorry.
Okay, yeah, so slide 33, the impact. So you want to be clear about who is being impacted, including those who may have looked and how they're being impacted. And it's good to start with the big picture. So one of the bills we talked about earlier is Restore the Vote. That's a bill that's been around since 2004. So since Attorney General Keith Ellison was actually a state legislator, he's been to Congress and now is back as the AG. He introduced it, but it's the bill we're still trying to get passed. When talking about that, you need to talk about who's being impacted, for instance. Those who are being overlooked. We know there may be a racial, we know disparity, we know that this impacts certain communities. So giving that big picture, but include the personal story, include the experience. And this does not have to be long. It can be very simple and concise, but you want to be able to make that story stay with the legislator and then know that, you know, your experience is special and that it does need to be accounted for as we're talking about changes that need to be happening. And then the third thing is why you're advocating for this issue. So just keep that in mind and talk about it. So, you know, you have the influence, you have the experience, and you have the story. But be able to just bottom line it of why you're advocating this issue, why it's personally important to you. You don't need data to tell your story. Legislators are not experts on all issues. Like I said, you may have someone on education who doesn't have any experience in the education system in Minnesota, or whose kids did it, or their experience is from 20, 30 years ago. So just knowing that everyone is not an expert, and because you go through these systems and because you have impacts, that your lived experience matters and it can be used to incite this change. Okay. And then slide 34, just a rule breakdown for group visits. You want to make sure that you have someone who is the intro and the closer, someone who keeps track of the time and facilitate, and wrap up as needed. You need someone who is the lead and the regulator. So that's still someone who keeps the conversation on track. If it's being veered off in a certain direction, and you want to make sure, you're getting back to your story, you're getting back to the reason why you're there and talking about that issue and what needs to be happening, that's the person to bring it back around. And then transition when we need to continue on. So as I said, these meetings can be 15 to 20 minutes. Sometimes they can be short. You might see a legislator in the hallway or be able to talk to them at an event. So being able to just transition when necessary is important to make sure you get your ask in there. And then a storyteller. You want to make sure that there's someone who shares a personal story, the impact of the issue and why you're advocating for the issue, but something that sticks and they know exactly why you're advocating. Okay, so next we have slide 34. So after visit and follow-up, you want to thank them for their time and ask them for a photo. And these were more in person, but right now, you can still take a photo on Zoom, screenshot. Be sure to send a thank you note or an email to your legislator. You want to make sure you restate your ask so they know exactly who you are. Include the meeting date and topic for reference in their email, especially for their legislative assistant who might be the person who follows up with you. And then just be sure to include any promised information. If you brought a one-pager and they wanted to send you an email form, or they wanted more information on the organization you're from or an upcoming event, just make sure to follow through with it, and that will be something that you'll be able to follow up with, and they'll be able to remember you by. But it's also going to creating that relationship and establishing that. So that could be, any articles. It could be a contact person for a legislator they told you to reach out to, and you wanted to follow up about that, to answer a question. But this can be done via email, or you can send a thank you note. So just be sure to CC the legislative assistant. So every legislator has an assistant, and this is someone who not only maintains their schedule, but is at their committee meetings, and is an integral part of them being successful at the legislature. And it's someone, if you're not able to have a relationship with the legislator or meet with them, be sure to reach out to the legislative assistant. It's someone that the legislator looks to during times, and they may be able to make sure what you're working for is communicated correctly. So just be sure to, as you're navigating and following up, that you're being strategic when you're doing that. And
I just want to provide an example. So Matthew and I, in the early stages of the coalition, we had a meeting with Dean Phillips. And he represents the West Metro, for those of you who do not know. I forget the exact district, but he's a national congressman. In our meeting, it was concise, running about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. But yet his team, took a screenshot of our Zoom meeting, via was virtual, and posted on their Instagram. Ultimately saying, I'm meeting with constituents, right? So not to say that you're the only one doing it, but they're happy to see you and see you and connect with you on a regular basis if you're able to reach out to them like that.
No, definitely.
And his election is coming up, so make sure you guys are tuning in on that. We love Dean Phillips. He's a great guy.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes. And does a lot of great work. I worked for him during the work that I do now.
Gotcha.
Can't endorse candidates, but he's been a great advocate for a lot of issues that we've worked on.
For sure.
Okay, so non-traditional visits. Some non-traditional visits that I mentioned, like I said, when the legislature is back open, just as I was talking about it being, the people's house and your house, just know that during the time, there's no security out at the legislature. You don't need to sign up to attend meetings in advance. It's always open to you during that time to go to these meetings and to meet with your legislator. So just know that, you can pull a legislator off the floor or committee during that time and talk to them about an issue. You may not get 15 minutes, but this is something you haven't been able to get on their calendar, or you were at a committee meeting. You're able to go up to a page that's in the that's in the committee, or maybe, you know, talk to their their legislative assistant before to see if they can meet for a few minutes. But that's something that you can do, or outside of floor session. So you can write a note to a page and they can see if they're able to come off. So that's when they're voting on bills, and that in the House, it happens, it's in the Capitol, and the Senate is in a different room. But during that time, you can go into the gallery and see them vote, see them do their business, and sometimes, you know, pull them off a floor session and talk to them. Maybe it's right before they're making a vote on something, or maybe it's about an issue that you're able to do and they're able to come off the floor. At an event, so you might be at a coalition meeting, you might be at an issue and advocacy event. That's a time where you can grab a few minutes and think about that agenda that we put out earlier, and in a concise way, you know, how you can have that conversation with them and share that impact and share that story, and let them know what you want to, and getting it trimmed down. And then talking to their legislative assistant. So if they're not available, and you're not able to set up a meeting with them, utilize their LA. There's someone who works on all their issues, who, like I said, attends their committee meetings sometimes, and sometimes, depending if they have a leadership position, is involved in some of the work that they're doing. So they're a great resource, and it's someone to utilize as you're navigating and sharing your stories, because outside of legislators, they're there as well. So utilizing them and having your voice be heard, and kind of having those non-traditional visits when you're not able to get one of those 15 to 20 minutes meeting scheduled. Okay, so events at the state capitol each session. So when session starts January 5th, there are lots of events that go on throughout May. So you have Day on the Hill event. So that could be, we have our African Heritage Day on the Hill at the end of February, but you know, you may have a Mental Health Day on the Hill. You may have Education Day on the Hill, or Teachers, Early Childhood, whatever the issue. There's something that might be of interest to you. So it's on the state legislature's website. They have the full calendar, or if you want to join and host your own Day on the Hill, just because of COVID, I don't know how the policies are, but anytime you can put a request in at the Historical Society, and you can have your own Day on the Hill or your own rally there. So press conferences happen in the press conference room. You may see something on the news that was shot in the press conference room in the Capitol. So those happen all the time. Most of them are open, or you can see them on the legislature's website, and they're up afterwards. Rallies happen all the time, before session, during session, even when it's coming to the end of session and they're negotiating. You might see people around the Capitol. And then those committee hearings that are open to the public that happen Monday through Thursday normally, but as session goes on and there are more bills that need to be discussed, as well as coming to the end of session and going through different negotiation and deadlines, those meetings happen way more often. So there are lots of opportunities to tune in, see what's going on, and to engage throughout the whole entire legislative session. Okay, and then virtual. So staying up to date on the Minnesota State Legislature's website, so that's what's in the background. They have live streaming that they do on their website. They have the agendas. They have the full meeting notes. Sometimes you can see afterwards or watch that past video. They're streaming a lot of things on Facebook that they were doing during special session. So we're in special session right now, September special session. So the governor has his executive powers once the COVID pandemic started, and he has an executive order where he has to go around the 11th of each month to the legislature and have them meet in session, and then they vote on his powers. And then they vote on different things. So in June, I think it was police accountability reform. They got HF1 passed, and they also got a $64 million program, so grants and funding for small business owners and minority business owners with deed. So there has been some work happening during session, but all of that is online. And you can see those upcoming meetings. Our newsletter, so the newsletter for my organization, the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage, we send out a weekly newsletter that has so many resources from across the state, from different organizations, from state agencies, ways to engage. And we also do a legislative alert list and different events like our Day on the Hill or a legislative debrief, where you're able to engage and learn how to go through the legislative process, as well as trainings like this. And then just keep in mind that written testimony, the email, the phone calls, even social media. You can find your legislator most of the time on Facebook, on Twitter. There are so many different ways to stay engaged with them. You can write that written testimony when you see that there's a hearing coming up and you may not be able to attend in person, but you want to make sure your voice is heard, and you can share it on social media when it's live so people can see what's going on. But virtually right now, there are many different ways to keep up with what's going on, but also pay attention and connect with those who are in charge and making those decisions. Okay, so we have an activity here that we want you to try, and that is how to find your legislator. So during this activity, you'll be able to click on the link that will be provided, and you put in your full address, and you'll be able to find out not only who your senator and your House representative is, but your full congressional delegation. So you'll be able to see your state senators as well as your House member for your district. But the first two are going to be your state reps, your senator and your House of Representatives. And when you click on contact, you'll be able to go and see their bio, see their bills that they authored, that they co-authored, what committees they stand on. We talked a lot about committees earlier. Now you'll be able to see what decisions your legislator is in charge of looking at, and what issues they're in charge of making decisions on, and also what bills they've been, utilizing and making during that time and how far they've gone. So we want you to look at this information. Oh,
just make sure you guys get on this. Make sure you guys are paying attention to this part specifically, because we're basically directing you on how to start using your voice. So do those things, be diligent, and we'll have all this stuff definitely on our Instagram and on our page so that you can access it and do the work, the pre-work beforehand.
No, definitely. You'll be able to see all of that information and take all these steps to really engage and find a way to make a difference in the way that you want to. So yes, this is what those things will look like. After you click that in, you'll be able to see who your representative is. So I use the address for the state capitol, and that's where we got Carlos Mariani. So he is a House member. He represents District 65B, and his office is in that state office building. So it's kitty corner to the state capitol there downtown, St. Paul. And just a couple of things that we talked about earlier today. You're able to see his contact information. You're able to see who his legislative assistant is, and then his committee assignment. So we were talking about public safety. Chair Mariani is the chair of the Public Safety and Criminal Justice Reform and Finance and Policy Division in the House. He's also on that subdivision. We talked about corrections, and then education, judiciary, and ways and means. You're able to see, his bio, what his background is, what his job background is. And then on those different links on your right, you'll be able to not only see what bills he chief offered, which ones he signed on to. So other legislators ask legislators to sign on and support their bill as co-authors. So you can see that down to your district demographics, and then what they've been working on in the news items. So you can see the press releases and everything. But this is one of the fastest ways just to find out who your legislators are, but see, what they're working on, what they care about. And then as we're having those meetings, the legislative visit, or as you're seeing them in committee, you have that information and you know what you need to talk to each one of them about. Okay.
This
and
is
then
our
the second activity. Oh, sorry.
This is no problem. This is our second activity. We just wanted you guys to think about your policy issue that you came up with at the beginning of the program, right? So we're referencing the beginning of the program, and then create your legislative visit elevator speech, introducing yourself, having 1 to 3 points. Include the impact or personal story. We've been talking about how important that is to make that relation, make that cognitive step in their mind that goes past data, right? Then ask them to support, reiterate your reasoning, and thank you for their time. That last little bit is almost like your thesis in writing. When you get to your conclusion, you want to restate your thesis, and it's a little bit like your introduction. So we want you to be consistent throughout you talking to these people. Be strong, be confident, and take advantage of that time.
Definitely. So using all that information, we have these final steps that we want to just make sure that you are aware of. Okay, so the first one is, this is your house. This building is paid for with your taxes, and we call it the people's house for a reason. So just know that it's open to you. These legislators represent you, and you have a right to be there and to make your voice be heard. Okay, the second one is, it's open to the public. There's no security. So just in knowing that it's your house, just know that you can show up there. You can make your voice be heard. You can go to a committee hearing. You can go to a rally. But just know that there's nothing stopping you from going. And you're able to do that civic engagement. So we have this upcoming election season. I don't know if Matthew or Jalen wanted to go in more in depth with that. But you can see what issues are important to your legislators by using those activities to see what bills they authored, what bills they co-authored, what they were supporting and what they weren't.
Hello and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
No
this is Matthew Seawood, co-founder of the Just Action Coalition. We have a special legislative training coming to you live today. Myself and Jalen Travis. Thank you so much.
Yep, what's going on? Matt,
Jasmine Carey, ladies and gentlemen, from the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage.
You can't do that.
I was handing you the time. Just start it times. And other people from the Council for Heritage. They have been very good to us in getting us started.
Hello,
I'm Jalen Travis. We are educating you guys and also moving in the direction to expand our platform. So we're very thankful for what they've done, and especially her individual
We'll say that on the second slide,
to
because
not
look
only
at our
help
second
put this
slide.
event together, but to
so
help
I'll just
us
introduce
before
the event.
and definitely work together in the future.
3.
So a big thank you to her. That's her contact information. And for Jalen and I, we are thankful that you guys took time to check us out, to understand what we're trying to push as far as getting in contact with those people that you need to get in contact with, right? So understanding that we know you guys are going to go out to protest. We know you guys are going to be on the front lines. This is another way that you can really be effective and use your voice as a youth to make change.
Yeah, and and this presentation is not a one-time thing, right? So you email your legislator one time, or you email your representative one time, and the work is done. The work has to continue, whether that's you email them every week, email them every other week. This has to continue in order to see the change that we want to see, because people, our representatives, have to start being held accountable by us, the constituents, right? And it starts with 1, knowing how to do that, and 2, knowing how to do that effectively. So on behalf of the Just Action Coalition and Matthew and I, we thank you for coming out to this youth legislative training event. We look forward to holding probably another one before the November 3rd election, which is 53 odd days away, I believe. So thank you once again. Thank you to Jasmine once again as well for putting on this great event for us to educate both youth and adults on how to create the change they want to see. All righty. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
like, are you done?
Right.
No, okay, my picture is back. I'm like, my video was off the whole entire time. But
All right.
I don't think it was showing. So,
Stop
yeah.
this recording.